And finally, Ryan Richardson, who is a lead of our part of our Office of the Brain Director, and also a lead in our program to enhance diverse perspectives. I should note for everybody that we're recording right now. So the slides and the recording will be made available after this is over. Next slide. So just a few housekeeping notes to start off. We will be using the question and answer feature to take questions throughout the webinar, and then we'll have a time at the end of the presentation to go through those questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions as part of your registration. We'll also get to those. All the participants, all the attendees are muted, so you can't speak, but you can type, again, your question in the question and answer box. If you have a general logistic question, you could also write it there or in the chat. Again, the slides are going to be available. They'll be sent to all registrants after this is over, as well as, again, a recording. If you have specific questions about the program that are really project specific, I would be happy to speak with you further. I will need a draft specific aims page if you want to set up a call to talk about your project in detail. It's ideal if I get these a month before the due date. I realize that we're very close to that at this point, but that's the ideal situation in most cases, is for you to send me an aims page at least a month before. And here's my email address here. It'll be on several of the other slides, as well as, again, my colleague, Miriam Gallet, who greatly helped me out with this program. Next slide. So a key point to this entire webinar is to first note that pretty much everything I say can be found in the funding opportunity itself. So really the biggest piece of advice that I can give you, honestly, for any NIH program out there, is to read the funding opportunity and read it carefully. Again, pretty much everything I say can be found in the text of the funding opportunity. I'll really be trying to highlight key things that I think are most important for you to pay attention to, and we'll make sure that your application gets to review and hopefully reviews well. So, you know, this is not intended to replace all the detailed information in that written funding opportunity. Next slide. So the goal of this funding opportunity is, you know, the name of it is for resource grants for technology integration and dissemination. And this, you know, dissemination is really the key part of this. This is for support to broadly disseminate a developed and validated tool or resource which is relevant to the goals of the BRAIN Initiative and will ultimately be integrated into neuroscience research practice by your users that you disseminate this to. So some key considerations that reviewers will be looking at very closely in your application is the idea of, you know, what is the pace of dissemination? Will this occur rapidly? And it actually is also part of the responsiveness criteria with this opportunity. If your project is not proposing to disseminate something by early in year 2, it will be considered non-responsive. And so again, I just want to reiterate that your resource has to be ready for dissemination. It can't be substantial development that's occurring that's going to take many years to do. We have other BRAIN initiative funding opportunities for developing tools, for developing resources. And again, this idea of broad dissemination. So hitting a lot of people, hitting your full community of users is a key consideration with this. This is not meant for a local resource where only people at your own university are going to get access to it. This is really about hitting the whole community of neuroscience researchers that are in this space and making this technology available to as many of them as possible. And I should note that that includes national as well as international users are appropriate for this. And I should also note that the idea of who you're disseminating this to does not need to be limited to an investigator that has specifically brain funding. They should be working in the brain initiative space, but they do not need to necessarily have a brain initiative grant of their own to be a recipient of your technology. You should be addressing a compelling need of researchers that they can't otherwise get through, say, another resource, something commercially available, something that's it's otherwise not available to them, or it's impractical for them to get in its current form. Again, you have to be distributing or disseminating a resource, a tool, a reagent, and other activities are supported under this opportunity, which may include user training, user workshops, access to a specialized facility, as well as minor improvements to increase the efficacy of the resource, minor adaptations to meet the needs of a user community. But again, this shouldn't be substantial development. Again, you want to be having broad dissemination be occurring by at least year 2. And again, not only are your users not limited to brain initiative investigators, but anyone is welcome to apply for this funding opportunity. You don't need to have developed your tool through a brain initiative grant yourself. Next slide. So a key point of this mechanism is that it's a U mechanism, which under NIH is a cooperative agreement mechanism, anything you see with that U on it. And this means that there will be more involvement from NIH staff in your project than you would get for, say, an R01. There will be, more back and forth, and this is milestone driven, which is a key consideration when you're thinking about applying to this funding opportunity. You will have to propose, and with NIH staff, quantitative milestones will be agreed upon prior to the project being initiated. Those are yearly, and importantly, they must be met in order to receive the next year's of funding. So, unlike a standard R01 where, you get the R01 and you pretty much have those 5 years of funding, assuming that you're following all the policies, this has that add-on layer of you need to be meeting those milestones, which I'll go through these in more detail, but this needs to say if you're saying you're going to disseminate it to X number of users. If you don't disseminate to X number of users, your funding can be cut off. So it's much less guaranteed. That's definitely a consideration in thinking about plugging this into the funding stream for your lab. Next slide. So I really want to highlight what components to the application are key to think about in making sure that you have a responsive and complete application. This is not, a simple thing to put together. No NIH grants are, for sure. But this does have additional, attachments, parts of it that, again, a standard R01 might not have. So I do really want to go through this in detail, because I would hate to see anybody go through the process of putting this together and then find out that their application can't move forward to review. That is just a terrible feeling. So I want to go through what things are considered non-responsive to this funding opportunity. As I mentioned before, this is not for novel, unproven technologies. It's not for substantial development. It's not for development of a tool. It's for dissemination. And again, the project plan should indicate that dissemination will be occurring by at least early year 2. If it's not, again, it would be considered non-responsive. This is not for support of you doing a clinical trial. This is not for you putting on a clinical trial or providing patient services. It's about providing a resource, perhaps for people, other individuals who might be doing their own, using this as part of a clinical trial. That's okay, but it can't be for you in particular to be doing a clinical trial. It's not for a repository of brain or related biospecimens. And a new addition to the newest version of this funding opportunity is that it will not be for disseminating data standards. There is a separate team within the BRAIN initiative, a team informatics, that has their own suite of funding opportunities that support dissemination, creation of data standards. And if you're in that space, feel free to reach out to me. I'll get you in touch with the people that are part of that team and can point you to the right funding opportunity if you're in the data standards space. If you're not sure if you're responsive or not, contact me, send me a draft specific aims page, and check and see before you go down the rabbit hole of putting together a full application. Again, ideally at least a month ahead of time. In most situations, I would like to get those aims ahead of time. Next slide. Another thing is to make sure your application is complete. Again, if you've been used to submitting an R01, you obviously know, that you need to have, bio sketches and the research strategy, things like that. There are some additional attachments to this funding opportunity that if you don't have, your application would be considered non-complete, and again, not moved forward to review. It would be kicked out of the system, which again, I do not want to see happen to anybody. So the two additional attachments are a milestone and timeline attachment, as well as a plan for enhancing diverse perspectives. And I'll go through these in more detail in the next couple of slides. So again, you need to have these two attachments or your application would be withdrawn and not reviewed. Next slide. All right, so the milestone attachment, this is separate from your research strategy. So 2 pages for you to describe what the milestones are in your project. And these should be clear, quantitative, and have, ideally kind of a yes, no answer as to whether or not they've been met. They should be related to outcomes as opposed to just saying that you did something. So I think this is a really good example here, saying that you're going to put on a workshop and it's going to have X number of attendees representing X number of different institutions. You're going to disseminate this resource to this many labs or this many people in this many different labs. That's, the sort of level that you should be thinking about for this. So again, the idea is hopefully it's pretty clear yes or no answer as to whether or not you've met them. And there should also be a rationale for how you've chosen the numbers that you've chosen here. We do have a template that you can consider, kind of see what standard activities are. They might not apply to every single proposal or every single project, but they can give you a flavor for the sort of things that we see in a lot of these U24. So I should note that there is a link on this slide. There's a link as well on the funding opportunity where you can get to the template. And again, these slides will be circulated, and everybody will be able to click on the links after this webinar. Next slide. Okay, and the next key point that is new for new BRAIN Initiative funding opportunities. All BRAIN Initiative funding opportunities moving forward have this plan for enhancing diverse perspectives as part of the review criteria, as part of a additional attachment, as well as part of incorporation into the research strategy. So what do we mean by diverse perspectives? So this is talking about broadly who does the research. So the idea of including investigators, trainees from backgrounds, including those that have been historically underrepresented in the biomedical research workforce. NIH has a definition of who is considered underrepresented, as well as including investigators from different scientific disciplines, varying career stages, different skills, different experiences, different expertise. And all this, I think, really relates to one of my first points that I noted about broad dissemination for this mechanism. It's also about who participates in the research as part of a study population. This is more for those who are actually performing human studies, but it's still an important point to make sure if human participants are being used, that they represent the U.S. population. And then finally, the idea of where the research is being done, or where this resource is going to, that it's going to diverse organizations or institutions. Historically, really large, well-resourced academic R1 institutions have successfully gotten a lot of BRAIN Initiative funding, but it's important to expand the BRAIN Initiative's reach so projects, partnerships, or collaborations are occurring at institutions that have not received as much BRAIN Initiative funding. So making sure geographically different types of institutions that they get access to what's happening in the BRAIN Initiative. So as I noted, everyone needs to be submitting a one-page plan for enhancing diverse perspectives, as well as incorporating it overall into the research strategy. That one-page attachment is really meant to be a summary of hopefully more things that are in the research strategy. It's part of the review. It's part of the significance, innovation, investigators' approach, and environment. It's part of that review, and reviewers are asked to consider it, and it will be considered in terms of funding decisions as well at the program side. Next slide. As I noted, the one-page attachment is meant to be a summary of the strategies to enhance diverse perspectives throughout the research strategy, as well as, including benchmarks, including milestones, including timelines for activities that are part of the plan for enhancing diverse perspectives, as well as approaches for assessing your progress. And I should note there's a wealth of resources online. I've included those links here. I would really, really encourage you to check those out. There has been a lot of work into making those, and so I think it's really in your best interest to read those. CDP, it's gonna vary from project to project. It's gonna vary in terms of what it contains. So keep that in mind. It can be included in terms of the budget if there are additional costs associated with making sure that your approach works. Next slide. Okay. So I just want to go back to, again, really briefly, this idea of broad dissemination, which, like I said, is a key consideration that review and program makes when assessing applications to this funding opportunity. So the idea is that, your users, like I said, should not be just at your own institution. They should be in many different labs, many different institutions, geographically distributed, can be in the US as well as international. Your users can be international. And related to everything I just said, they should ideally represent diverse perspectives in thinking about the definition that I just described about what diverse perspectives mean. And I think a really good application will have letters of support that show that you've considered diverse perspectives in your user community and in supporting your approach. So again, just want to reiterate the idea of concentrating in a single geographic region. I think this is particularly important if you are someone who is proposing a core-related facility. Those, have the tendency historically to be concentrated in, your own institution or ones nearby, just by the nature of how core typically work. So that's something to really think about, that you really need to make a strong case that it's not going to be geographically limited if it's something like a core. And then again, just want to reiterate again that your users are not limited to people who have BRAIN initiative funding. They just need to be people who are, working towards goals that are relevant to the BRAIN initiative. And they can be working also in, in the translational space, in animal models of disease as well. Another point that's been added in the reissue is a discussion of the technology evolution. This is part of the research strategy section. And really, it's related to the length of support that you're asking for here, and really making the case that your resource is going to be cutting edge throughout the entire period of support. And I realize this might be kind of like looking at least a bit into a crystal ball, but I think you should be considering, okay, what has happened in the past in this technology space? Is it something where, it's rapidly evolving, and, based on that, perhaps in a couple of years, something else might come up that could be more cutting edge. So I think you want to make the case that this is going to remain cutting edge for the entire period of support that you propose. You can go up to 5 years. You don't necessarily have to propose full 5 years. You can propose less than that. But again, you want to make the case that, that this, again, will remain cutting edge through that entire period. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple of common questions that I hear a lot before going through the questions that we got in the chat and beforehand. Some of these are actually kind of based on questions people sent in as well. So I get a lot of questions about cost structures. Am I allowed to give this away for free? Do I need to charge people for it? So you don't have to have user fees. They're not required, so you can give it away completely for free if that's your strategy for your proposal. But I do encourage people to think about user fees, maybe user fees over the course of the project, because they can provide a potential mechanism for sustainability. And I should clarify what I mean for sustainability and what the funding opportunity means in terms of sustainability. This is about how will this resource continue to be disseminated when NIH support, when this support ends. So say if it's 5 years of funding, what would happen at year 6? How would it continue to be disseminated? And if you're already thinking about user fees and incorporating them in as strategy for sustainability, I think that can be a good strategy. Again, you have to understand your user community as well with imposing a cost structure. Another question that I get a lot is in terms of the scientific steering committee. This is another point about this funding opportunity to think about. A scientific steering committee is part of this. They will be involved at least twice a year in the project, seeing how it's moving forward, giving guidance. They are part of, giving NIH feedback on how they think that this project is doing. And so you need to describe the type of expertise and the type of roles that this committee should have. You do not need to name specific members. It is sometimes actually better if you don't, because that adds a level of having conflicts for review. But you should talk about what are the types of expertise, what are the types of people that you would ask to be on this committee, and what sort of role do you see them in playing? Perhaps they're part of the prioritization plan. If this is something you need to pick and choose who the users are. That could be something that you could propose that they're involved in, say. I often get questions about budget. There is not a specific budget limit for this funding opportunity. That said, as always, you need your budget to be well justified, and it needs to reflect the actual needs of your project. In general, the proposed budget associated with this is thought to be around $10 million per year for an estimated 10 to 20 projects. So again, we do not anticipate many projects being well over $1 million per year. So keep that in mind. But again, there's not a set, specific, limited budget to this. There is a link here where you can see who's been funded, who is currently funded under this mechanism. I would encourage you to check that out to see if there maybe is something out there that is similar to yours. So you want to make sure that you can make the case that yours is different. And then finally, what if you have a technology that only applies to a certain type of researcher, a niche type of researcher, say, people working with this sort of animal model? Is this allowed? And it is. But you need to justify the impact and the significant need of that smaller, a small group of researchers. And very importantly, that you have, that you will distribute it to, to that entire community, and you've considered that entire community perspective in your proposal. Next slide. And with that, I also wanted to put on these slides a lot of really useful resources. These are all hyperlinked. So again, when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on all these. They include our dissemination program page, where you can learn about all the different activities that we have in dissemination, not just this funding opportunity in particular, but a lot of other things that the BRAIN Initiative is doing in the dissemination space. Our program page on this funding opportunity that includes frequently asked questions, the template, as well as the currently funded U24 projects. And then again, guidance on the plan for enhancing diverse perspectives. Again, I would really encourage you to check that out if you have any questions. There's frequently asked questions there. There's key elements. I've also included an email address here if you have more specific follow-up questions that you can't find the answers to on those resources. Next slide. And with that, definitely feel free to send me an email. Again, if you want to talk about your project, I will need a draft-specific aims page. The next due date is rapidly approaching, February 15th, but there is one after that, October 14th. So don't despair if you're not ready yet. It's okay. But definitely feel free to reach out to me and Miriam if you have any questions. And with that, I think, Miriam, do you want to start going through the questions?
Sure. I'm just going to answer one question that was sent to me asking about how you can get these slides. We're going to send these slides to everyone who has registered for the webinar. So we have all the email addresses, and we're going to send the slides to everyone after the webinar.
Yep, if you registered and you put your email, you will get these slides.
Okay, so I'm gonna start reading the questions that were sent before the webinar. Start with the first one. Does the initiative also support translational research efforts or only basic science projects?
Right, sure. So I wasn't entirely sure if that person was asking, if I'm doing translational research or if my users are doing translational research, and the answer is different, depending on what perspective you were coming from. If you yourself are proposing that you are doing translational research in the sense that you're developing a therapeutic or a diagnostic or a device, that's not what this is. That's not what this is for, your own translational research. If you have a tool, a resource that you're disseminating, and it's going to users, investigators, researchers that are in the translational space, that is allowable. They should be in the BRAIN Initiative space. They should be working again towards the goals of the BRAIN Initiative. If they are doing translational research, that is okay, but it's not for you yourself to be doing translational research.
Okay, how to best demonstrate the plan to disseminate techniques in the application?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is hopefully where the milestone attachment and the description of what is expected in that milestone attachment should help you. That's really where you can go through the specifics of, these are the benchmarks that we need to make. I mean, I can't say, these are the specific activities that you need to do or that you should be doing. I mean, that's it's really kind of up to you. Again, thinking about those key points, this idea of, a rapid dissemination to a broad user group. So what is the strategy that's going to demonstrate that the best?
Next question, can postdocs apply? If so, and if awarded, can they take it to their tenure track position?
All right, so anybody can apply for this. If you have the skills for doing this, you are welcome to apply. It's not meant for a certain type of investigator. I will say that there are depending on the details of what the resource is, it may require institutional commitment. And so if you're, potentially not going, not at your, don't anticipate being at your current institution for the entire project period, then that's going to make it difficult for review to evaluate your project. So again, it does kind of depend on your situation for sure, but I think that's something to just think about is the institutional support and the stability of that throughout the entire period.
Should my tool have already many users outside my center before applying to the grant?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you don't necessarily have to have many users outside of your institution currently. I mean, it depends on the details of each project. I think you should be able to demonstrate that you should be able to make a compelling argument to review and program that outside users will be interested in it and that you will be able to get it to outside users. So I think that's the key consideration, that everybody's on board, that they think it has a high likelihood of getting to users outside your institution.
Can dissemination in year 2 start in our own institution and we begin the national phase in year 3 onwards?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a set, there's not a set definition in terms of how, what dissemination exactly needs to look like in year 2. I think as broadly as you can get it, as quickly as you can get it, is preferable, and I think will be looked the most favorably by review and program. But I think if you can, so I would just keep that in mind in terms of making that decision. So it can, in terms of like, you won't be considered non-responsive, but I do think that it might not look the best in terms of it might not do as strongly in review in those sort of cases.
Next, if we have a tool developed, but we would like to test out specific test cases of the tool with different labs, can we add support at personnel at those labs?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be an allowable cost. I do, again, want to just reiterate this idea of broad dissemination, rapid and broad dissemination. Use cases, could be considered dissemination. It might not be reviewed as strongly in the context of, specific just a very limited number of test cases. And I also just at this point too want to make a plug for the fact that we do have a dissemination supplement program out there. This is if you have an Active Brain Award, that there is a supplement program available for, I think maybe more this sort of activity. Carrie, you can correct me if I'm wrong going down this path. But for, if you kind of need to understand your user community a bit better, need to be doing maybe some tweaking of the technology and interacting with your user community. And again, if you have an Active Brain Award, that might be another thing to consider in that case.
Just related to the previous question, is what type of budget is allowed for each user? So not sure that means for each user or just applicants or user of the resource.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to interpret that question. I'll come back to it.
Oh, so they're saying user of the resource.
Okay, so sorry, say the question again.
So what type of, I think, budget is allowed for users of the resource? I guess is related to whether you can pay someone at the user institute.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. There's not a set allowed budget of, you have to allocate, this dollar amount or this, this amount to to this sort of user. There's no definition in terms of that sort of budget rules.
Okay, so is it okay to have the users who are doing clinical research for a specific disease?
Yeah, so I think again, it's important to consider this is a brain initiative program, and the brain initiative isn't specific to a type of disease, and it spans a lot of different NIH institutes. So I would keep that in mind. That being said, if you do have users who are working on a certain disease, but again, you can make the case that this is in service of the brain initiative, and perhaps there's a lot of different users working in perhaps different diseases. Again, the important thing is that there is a connection to the goals of the brain initiative. So that's I think a key thing in deciding that question. But yes, certainly you can have users that are disease specific.
Okay, the next question is about data sharing. They're asking if so if you're applying to create a core style resource for researchers would come to use our technology to generate neuroscience data, does the core need to control how those data are shared?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that in terms of the data sharing requirements for this opportunity, it's really about the data sharing requirements are only the data that you're generating from the project. It's not the data of your user. So you don't have to specify what what archive or what format or things like that in terms of what your reviewers, your users use. So yeah, so you don't have to tell them exactly how they need to share their data. Presumably, if they're brain initiative funded, they need to have their own, if they have their own R01 through the brain initiative, they will have their own agreement on how they're supposed to share that data.
If someone has an existing U24, can they use this FOA to apply for a renewal application, either February 15 or October 14 due dates?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that question, and I didn't note the fact that renewals are allowed now for this funding opportunity. I would definitely encourage, if you are considering a renewal, to talk to me. There are some specific instructions, pretty specific instructions about what we expect to see from a renewal application, what the progress report should look like, and the kind of things associated with that, as well as specific review criteria associated with the renewal. So I definitely encourage you to talk with me prior to that submission.
So would developing an educational curriculum to drive use of a technology with undergrads or graduate students be appropriate as part of a dissemination plan?
Yeah, so outreach, training workshops, whatever is in service of getting your resource out there, getting your resource better understood, and integrated into neuroscience practice is is allowable and definitely encouraged. Again, I think that it's important to think about it in terms of the final user base, so that it needs to be, ultimately in service of that. But if you can make that case, then like I said, outreach, training workshops are definitely allowable.
Okay, so back to the disease question. So they're asking, since Brain Initiative didn't, like, previous grants couldn't focus on disease, they're asking if a user on a U24 can focus on brain cancer using the tools that the U24 project has, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could certainly use this for for, like I said, disease specific research. I think you also, again, want to make the case that that it's your overall user base is in service of the Brain Initiative, and not the entire user base is concentrating on a specific disease in particular and in service of that particular disease. But again, if you have user or users that are working on a certain type of disease, and then another group of users that might be working on another type of disease, or looking at circuitry more generally, that's fine.
Okay, two questions about budget. What is the expected budget for hands-on training workshops? Is there a limit?
Yeah, again, there's not a specific, set number that I can give you that, this is the amount you should spend on training, or this is the amount that's allowed in terms of training, and so yeah, I can't say that there is a specific amount.
And does this mechanism allow for budgeting for maintenance service contracts from vendors?
Yeah, so I mean, it's for disseminating the resource, so what the costs are associated with with that resource. If maintenance if maintenance is a necessary component, I think that would be, it would be an allowable cost. I mean, I think that, you know, it is important to consider institutional support as well. I'm assuming if this is, you know, for something that's like a core facility, that's really where we hope that there's institutional support as well as the, you know, grant support that is integrated into it. And again, you know, this is really about dissemination of the resource. So, so that should be really what, you know, what the budget should be in service for.
Okay, so that's mostly all of the general questions that we got. We do have some specific, like project-specific questions. As Natalie mentioned, we encourage you to send us specific aims for those projects. But something that could be more general, I'm going to ask, do EEG technologies, EEG fMRI, qualify for these grants?
Yeah. So, you know, part of, you know, the BRAIN initiative is, you know, understanding, you know, seeing how the brain works dynamically, and that would include, you know, non-invasive technologies in humans. So, so yeah, those sorts of technologies are definitely part of the BRAIN initiative.
And does the program cover sharing of model organisms?
Yeah, I mean, so I think again, the key idea here is the, you know, the dissemination of that resource. And again, that is impractical in its current form. You know, there is a lot of already other required sharing that occurs if it's a model organism that's been developed with NIH resources. I think there's a lot of you know, steps that investigators need to take to make sure that it's freely available already. So again, we want to make the case that it's something that's impractical in its current form, that needs extra support associated with it.
Okay, so the last question that I think was covered in the presentation, but if you have any specific guidance for a potential application for Brain U24 to serve as a shared resource facility for unique brain-related technology.
Yeah, so I think the idea of a shared resource facility or a shared like core facility, you know, the key point there is to think about that idea of broad dissemination, and particularly for, you know, something that maybe requires, you know, people to come to, you know, potentially come to that physical location. We really need to make the case that that they, you know, people from outside your immediate geographic location are going to come, are going to be able to access a shared facility, and take advantage of the resources of a shared facility. So I think that's the key thing to think about when you have that sort of resource.
Okay, so that's all the questions that we got. Again, if you have any other questions or any project-specific questions, please reach out to us.
Great. Thanks so much, Miriam. Thanks so much, everybody else, for joining. And with that, we'll close. And again, thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.